Laughter echoed through the crystal ballroom as the elite awaited the ultimate humiliation. A notorious syndicate boss was supposed to publicly reject the overweight heiress pushed into his arms. Instead, dead silence fell when a singular chilling promise slipped past his lips, rewriting the rules of the underworld forever. In our world, respect is currency, and humiliation is a death sentence. My name is Gabriel Costa. By the age of 32, I had buried my father, consolidated the 5 warring factions of the New York Syndicate, and taken absolute control of the Eastern Seaboard's underground logistics. But having power and keeping it are 2 entirely different beasts. To keep it, I needed access to the Newark shipping ports, and the Newark ports were tightly controlled by a single unbribable ghost of a man, Commissioner Richard Montgomery. Montgomery wasn't mob. He was old money deeply entrenched in state politics and notoriously paranoid. He had only one weakness, his only child, his daughter Claraara. For months, my underbosses had been trying to find an angle away into Montgomery's inner circle. That was when Tristan Hughes and Lorenzo Bianchi stepped in. Tristan and Lorenzo were heirs to the old-school Italian and Irish syndicates men who smiled in my face at sit-downs while actively plotting to carve up my territory. They were relics boys playing dress-up in their father's suits, but they had political connections I lacked. "We have a gift for you, Gabriel." Tristan had purred over a glass of Macallan at the Onyx Room a week prior. An introduction. Commissioner Montgomery is bringing his daughter to the winter gala at the Waldorf Astoria. We've arranged for you to be seated at their private table. Charm, the daughter and the father, hands you the keys to the kingdom. It sounded too easy. I knew it was a setup. I just didn't know what the trap was. When I arrived at the Waldorf Astoria on the night of the gala, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and underlying malice. The room was a sea of custom tuxedos and glittering designer gowns. I navigated the floor, shaking hands with senators, and made men alike my eyes, scanning for Montgomery. I found Tristan and Lorenzo waiting by table 1. They looked like cats who had swallowed the canary, barely containing their smug grins. "Gabriel," Lorenzo said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Allow us to introduce you to your future bride, Clara Montgomery." He stepped aside. The trap sprang shut, and the sheer cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Clara Montgomery was not the typical high society heiress. In a room full of starved, surgically enhanced socialites, Clara stood out like a target painted in neon. She was fat. There is no polite, euphemistic way to describe the reality of what the room saw, and there was no hiding it under the sprawling layers of her dark emerald marchesa gown. She was heavily overweight, thick arms, a wide waist, and a soft, round face that was flushed deep red with sheer agonizing embarrassment. She stood beside her father, clutching a sequined evening bag so tightly her knuckles were white. She was sweating slightly under the heat of the massive crystal chandeliers, visibly struggling to breathe through what I could only imagine was a crippling wave of social anxiety. The silence around our table was deafening, followed immediately by the rapid, venomous buzzing of whispers. Tristan and Lorenzo hadn't just set me up. They had engineered a public spectacle designed to destroy me. In their minds, they had backed me into an impossible corner. If I played the gentleman and courted the fat girl, my ruthless reputation would be shattered. I would become the laughingstock of the 5 families, seen as a desperate, weak man who would stoop to anything for a shipping lane. Blood in the water. But if I reacted the way they expected me to, if I scoffed, turned my back, or insulted her to save my pride, Richard Montgomery would witness the public humiliation of his beloved daughter. He would lock down the ports forever, strangling my empire's cash flow and inciting a mutiny among my capos. It was a brilliant, vicious checkmate. I looked at Tristan. His eyes were dancing with malicious glee. He was waiting for the eruption. He was waiting for the famous Costa temper to flare up and burn my own empire to the ground. Then I looked back at Clara. Most people in her position would be looking at the floor, praying for the ground to swallow them whole. But as my eyes met hers, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. She wasn't looking down. She was looking right at me. Behind the flushed cheeks and the trembling hands was a pair of sharp, highly intelligent dark brown eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what this was, what Tristan had done, and she knew she was being used as a prop in a game of monsters. The profound sadness in her gaze wasn't for herself. It was a silent, resigned acceptance of the cruelty of the world. She didn't pity herself. She endured it. In that fleeting second, I saw more strength in this trembling, heavy-set woman than I had ever seen in the hardened killers that surrounded me. Miss Montgomery. I said, my voice cutting through the whispers like a serrated blade. I stepped forward, bypassing Tristan entirely, and extended my hand. Gabriel Costa. It is an absolute honor. Clara hesitated. A murmur rippled through the nearby tables. Slowly she unclasped one hand from her bag and placed it in mine. Her skin was soft, but her grip was surprisingly firm. Mr. Costa, she replied quietly. Her voice was steady, despite the tremor in her fingers. The honor is mine. I pulled out a chair for her, a custom-reinforced seat that Tristan had undoubtedly arranged just to highlight her size. I sat directly beside her, ignoring the incredulous stares of the men who had planned my downfall. The game was on, but I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. Every course brought a new, thinly veiled insult from across the table. Tristan and Lorenzo, emboldened by their own perceived cleverness, began to push the boundaries of their joke. So Gabriel, Tristan said loudly, as the waiters cleared the appetizer plates, ensuring his voice carried to the neighboring tables. I understand you're looking to expand your operations. Taking on a lot of heavy cargo, I hear. It requires a man with a very broad capacity to handle such massive burdens. Lorenzo snickered into his wine glass. Across the room, a few prominent mob wives hid their smiles behind crystal flutes of champagne. Beside me, Clara flinched. It was a microscopic movement, but I felt the shift in the air. She carefully folded her napkin and placed it on her lap, her eyes fixed perfectly on the center of her empty plate. My daughter handles the logistics for the family trust, Commissioner Montgomery said, gruffly, oblivious to the double meanings, though his eyes darted nervously around the table. She's brilliant with numbers. Oh, I have no doubt Clara knows her way around large figures. Lorenzo chimed in, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. My jaw locked. Underneath the table, my hand balled into a fist so tight my knuckles ached. I had murdered men for far less than a sideways glance. Yet here were two silver spoon cowards, openly mocking a woman simply for existing all to get at me. I leaned closer to Clara. "Ignore them," I murmured, keeping my voice so low only she could hear. "They are dead men walking." She didn't look at me, but she whispered back, her voice barely a breath. "You don't have to defend me, Mr. Costa. I know why I'm here. I know I'm the joke. Just endure it, get the port deal from my father, and you never have to look at me again." The resignation in her voice hit me harder than a bullet. She had spent her entire life being the punchline written off and discarded because she didn't fit into a sample-sized dress. She had accepted her role as collateral damage in the games of powerful men. Not today, I thought. Not in my presence. The main course arrived. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point. Everyone was watching our table, waiting for the inevitable moment when I would snap and reject her. They wanted to see the Costa air break. Tristan stood up, tapping his silver fork against his champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The ballroom fell completely silent. The orchestra ceased playing. Hundreds of eyes turned toward table 1. Ladies and gentlemen, Tristan projected his voice, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I'd like to propose a toast to Gabriel Costa, a man who has always taken whatever is placed in front of him. A man who isn't afraid to take on the biggest challenges in the room. More muffled laughter. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. A single tear betrayed her slipping down her cheek, catching the light of the chandeliers. We wish you and your beautiful new prospect the best of luck. Tristan finished, raising his glass directly at me. May your union be as substantial as she is. Open laughter erupted from the Bianchi and Hughes tables. It was time. I didn't rush. I slowly reached into my jacket, withdrew a monogrammed silk handkerchief, and gently wiped the tear from Clara's cheek. The tenderness of the action sent a shock-wave of confusion through the immediate vicinity. The laughter began to falter. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the marble floor sounded like a gunshot. I stood to my full height, towering over the table. I didn't look at Montgomery. I didn't look at the crowd. I locked my eyes dead onto Tristan Hughes. The smirk slowly melted off Tristan's face as he realized I wasn't blushing. I wasn't embarrassed. I was radiating a cold, localized violence that froze the air in the room. Behind me, I heard the subtle rustle of fabric as 40 Costa soldiers, strategically stationed around the ballroom, simultaneously stepped forward, slipping their hands inside their jackets. The room went deathly still. You could hear a pin drop. I reached down and took Clara's hand, pulling her gently to her feet. She looked up at me, terrified, bewildered. I pulled her to my side, wrapping my arm securely around her waist, claiming her in front of the entire Eastern underworld. I looked back at Tristan, my voice dropping to a terrifying, echoing calm. She is mine. Your families are finished. 7 words. 7 words that shattered the carefully constructed hierarchy of the New York underworld. For 2 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. Tristan's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen white. He opened his mouth to speak, to play it off as a joke, but the words died in his throat. Lorenzo took a physical step backward, bumping into a waiter. Gabriel. Tristan stammered, the bravado entirely gone. It was just a jest. Leave, I commanded, my voice slicing through his pathetic excuse. Before I turn this ballroom into an abattoir. Panic erupted. The Bianchi and Hughes capos scrambled, practically tripping over themselves to get their bosses out of the room. Chairs were knocked over, glasses shattered. The high society elite who had been laughing seconds ago were now huddled in terror, realizing that they had just witnessed a declaration of total war. I turned to Commissioner Montgomery, who was staring at me in absolute, unadulterated shock. Commissioner, I said smoothly, as if I hadn't just ordered the execution of 2 crime families. If you will excuse us, Clara and I are leaving. We have much to discuss. I didn't wait for his permission. I kept my arm around Clara and guided her toward the main exit. The sea of people parted for us like the Red Sea averting their eyes, terrified to even look at the woman they had been openly mocking minutes prior. As we stepped out into the freezing New York night, the valet rushed forward with my armored SUV. I opened the door for Clara. She stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping her hair, looking at me as if I were an alien. "Why?" She finally choked out her chest, heaving. "Why did you do that? You just started a war. Over a joke. Over me." I stepped closer to her, blocking the biting wind. I looked at the woman who had braced herself against the cruelty of the world, and I saw my future. They thought they were giving me a heavy burden to sink my empire. I told her, my eyes tracing the beautiful, stunned features of her face. They didn't realize they were giving me my anchor. I helped her into the car. The trap had been sprung all right, but it wasn't my grave they had dug. It was theirs. The fallout from the Waldorf Astoria gala was immediate, bloody, and entirely unprecedented. By the time the sun rose over the frozen Manhattan skyline, the fragile truce governing the Eastern syndicates had completely evaporated. Gabriel Costa had drawn a line in the marble floor, and the Hughes and Bianchi families had no choice but to cross it. The vicious whispers that had mocked Clara Montgomery's heavy frame hours earlier were rapidly replaced by the deafening roar of automatic weapons, shattered glass, and burning shipping containers along the Brooklyn waterfront. Not since John Gotti orchestrated the brazen assassination of Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in the winter of 1985 had the criminal landscape of New York experienced such a violent tectonic shift. But this war was different. It was not fought over stolen shipments or historical vendettas. It was ignited because a reigning king had refused to let a woman be treated as a disposable jester. Within the fortified walls of the Costa estate in upstate New York, Clara Montgomery was placed under maximum protection. Gabriel's top capos, hardened men who had spent their lives surviving the streets, initially viewed her with deep skepticism. To them, she was the fat girl, a high society liability whose sheer physical presence had inadvertently started a massive turf war. They expected her to weep, to panic, or to demand her father send an army of state police to extract her. Clara did none of those things. Instead, on the third morning of the conflict, Clara walked into Gabriel's private war room. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer that draped elegantly over her wide hips and soft, thick curves. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe utilitarian bun. She bypassed the heavily armed guards, ignoring their bewildered stares, and stopped directly in front of Gabriel's massive oak desk. "Your logistics are a mess," Clara stated, her voice devoid of the trembling anxiety she had displayed at the gala. She dropped a thick leather-bound ledger onto the desk with a heavy thud. "You are fighting Tristan and Lorenzo with bullets. That is archaic and expensive. You want to destroy them, you suffocate their wallets." Gabriel looked up from his maps, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He gestured for his men to step back. "Explain." Clara leaned over the table, her presence commanding the room despite the initial prejudices of the men surrounding her. Tristan Hughes relies on the South Brooklyn ports to smuggle untaxed luxury vehicles and weapons. Lorenzo Bianchi uses the garment district fronts to launder the cash. My father controls the port authorities, yes, but I manage the blind trusts and shell corporations that fund the union bosses operating those docks. She tapped a manicured, plump finger against a specific shipping route on Gabriel's map. They thought I was just a heavy, useless prop. They didn't realize that my father trusted me to run the numbers because nobody ever looks at the overweight girl in the corner of the room. I was invisible to them. And because I was invisible, I saw everything. Over the next 3 weeks, Clara Montgomery completely revolutionized the Costa Syndicate's war strategy. Her financial genius was staggering, mirroring the brilliance of Michael Francese's legendary gasoline tax schemes from the 1980s, but with a modern, devastatingly lethal twist. She weaponized her own administrative access. With a few encrypted phone calls and meticulously forged digital manifests, Clara systematically rerouted Bianchi's illegal shipments directly into the hands of federal task forces. She froze the Hughes family's offshore accounts by triggering automated audits that choked their cash flow to a dead stop. The capos, who had once scoffed at her size, now stood in absolute awe of her intellect. The fat girl was single-handedly starving their enemies into submission without firing a single shot. Gabriel watched her transformation with profound reverence. In the quiet hours of the night, long after the war room had emptied, their relationship shifted from an alliance born of defiance into an unbreakable, deeply passionate bond. Society had told Gabriel that power was meant to be paired with fragile, starving supermodels, women who looked beautiful on an arm, but shattered under pressure. Clara was the exact opposite. She was substantial. She was a fortress. She took up space in a world that demanded she shrink, and Gabriel found himself utterly captivated by the fierce, brilliant woman hidden beneath the layers of societal scorn. "They underestimated you," Gabriel murmured one evening, standing behind her chair as she finalized a devastating blow to Lorenzo's real estate holdings. He rested his hands gently on her broad, soft shoulders, leaning down to press a kiss against her temple. Clara paused, her thick fingers resting gently on the keyboard. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. "They underestimated us both, Gabriel. They thought you were a brute, fueled only by anger, and they thought I was a joke. We are going to show them exactly what happens when the punchline hits back. Desperation is a foul scent, and by the 4th month of the Costa War, Tristan Hughes and Lorenzo Bianchi absolutely reeked of it. Their territories had been cannibalized. Their capos were defecting in droves to the Costa Syndicate, realizing that Gabriel and his new queen were an unstoppable, highly lucrative force. Tristan stripped of his luxury lifestyle and, pushed to the brink of financial ruin, made one final fatal miscalculation. He believed that Clara was Gabriel's only weak point. If he could eliminate the woman who was dismantling his empire from behind a computer screen, he could force Gabriel to surrender the ports. Tristan leveraged his last remaining political favor to have Commissioner Richard Montgomery arrested on highly publicized fabricated corruption charges. The message delivered to the Costa compound was simple and cowardly. Come to the abandoned pier, 42 alone, to negotiate your father's release, or he dies in a federal holding cell. It was an obvious trap. Gabriel's immediate reaction was to send 50 heavily armed men to wipe Pier 42 off the map entirely. But Clara placed a steady, heavy hand on Gabriel's chest, stopping his wrath in its tracks. "No," Clara said, her voice icy and resolute. "This started because they thought I was weak. It ends with me proving that I am not. Let them think they've won. Let them think I am walking blindly into their snare." On a bitterly cold Tuesday night, the fog rolling off the Atlantic Ocean obscured the rusted shipping containers of Pier 42. Tristan Hughes and Lorenzo Bianchi stood shivering near the edge of the water, flanked by 10 of their last remaining highly paid mercenary guards. They were nervous, scanning the shadows, waiting for the massive armored convoy they expected Gabriel to send. Instead, a single unassuming black sedan rolled quietly down the pier. The doors opened, and Clara Montgomery stepped out into the freezing fog. She was wearing a heavy ankle-length wool coat that emphasized her large frame, her breath misting in the frigid air. She walked toward them, completely unarmed, her posture straight, her chin held high. She didn't tremble. She didn't sweat. She was the absolute embodiment of lethal calm. Tristan barked a harsh, incredulous laugh, pulling his weapon and aiming it directly at her chest. "Gabriel actually let you come alone. The great Costa boss is hiding behind his fat, ugly bride while she does his dirty work. I knew he was a coward." "Gabriel isn't hiding Tristan," Clara replied evenly, stopping 20 feet away from the barrel of his gun. "He is simply allowing me the courtesy of finishing what you started at the Waldorf." "You're delusional, Clara," Lorenzo spat, stepping forward. "Your father is rotting in a cell. Your little financial tricks are over. You are going to sign over the port authorities to us right now, or we dump your heavy corpse into the harbor." Clara smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant expression that caused Lorenzo to falter. "You still don't understand logistics, Lorenzo," Clara said softly, her voice echoing in the damp air. "You didn't ask yourselves why Pier 42 was abandoned. You didn't ask yourselves why the harbor master suddenly went deaf to your radio calls tonight. You look at me and you still just see a fat girl you can push around." She reached into the deep pocket of her wool coat and pulled out a small metallic flare lighter. "I didn't come here to negotiate for my father," Clara stated, her eyes locking onto Tristan's panicked face. "My father is already sitting comfortably in Gabriel's private study sipping scotch. The federal agents you bribed were actually on my payroll. You see, while you were busy trying to humiliate me, I bought your men. I bought this pier. I bought your very lives." Clara flicked the lighter, the bright red flame hissing to life in the darkness. "And Gabriel didn't let me come alone," she finished. "He just let me go first." Clara tossed the flare over her shoulder onto the damp concrete. The moment the red light illuminated the fog, the shadows around Tristan and Lorenzo came alive. From atop the rusted shipping containers, from the dark crevices of the warehouse, and from the freezing water of the harbor itself, Gabriel Costa's elite strike force materialized. Dozens of laser sights cut through the mist, instantly painting the chests and foreheads of Tristan Lorenzo and their remaining mercenaries. Gabriel emerged from the fog directly behind Clara. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like the Grim Reaper in a tailored overcoat. He stepped up beside her, wrapping his arm possessively around her wide waist, his eyes burning with a dark, unyielding fury as he looked at the two men who had tried to turn his queen into a punchline. Tristan dropped his weapon, falling to his knees as the realization of his total, inescapable defeat washed over him. Lorenzo was openly weeping, begging for mercy to an empty sky. 7 words, Tristan." Gabriel's voice boomed over the sound of the crashing waves. "I gave you 7 words at that gala. She is mine. Your families are finished." "Did you really think I was bluffing?" "Gabriel, please," Tristan choked out, raising his shaking hands. "We surrender. Take the ports. Take it all. Just let us walk away." Gabriel looked down at Clara. He didn't issue the order. He deferred to the true mastermind of the Empire. "What do you think, Maya Regina?" "Do we let them walk?" Clara looked at the men kneeling in the dirt before her. She thought of the lifetime of cruel jokes, the vicious sneers the society that had demanded she apologize for taking up space in the world. She had spent her life shrinking to make small men feel big. She was done shrinking. "No," Clara said, her voice completely devoid of pity. "Take out the trash." Gabriel nodded to his men. The deafening roar of gunfire shattered the silence of the harbor, echoing across the water and signaling the absolute final end of the old regime. The Costa War was over. The eastern seaboard had been conquered not by brute strength alone, but by the brilliant, unstoppable mind of the woman everyone had foolishly discarded. Months later, Gabriel and Clara Costa were married in a private ceremony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The criminal elite from across the globe attended, bowing their heads in absolute deference when the new queen of the syndicate entered the room. She wore a custom-designed, breathtaking gown that celebrated every thick, heavy curve of her body. She was radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. Gabriel took her hands at the altar, looking deeply into the sharp, intelligent eyes that had saved his empire and stolen his heart. They had set him up with the fat girl as a joke. But in the end, the joke had destroyed them all, leaving Clara to wear the crown she had always deserved. The sheer brilliance of Clara, turning her greatest perceived weakness into a weapon, is the ultimate revenge story. Gabriel and Clara absolutely dominated the underworld by outsmarting everyone who mocked them. Do you think Tristan and Lorenzo got exactly what they deserved at the harbor? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this insane, real-life mafia drama, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories.